Dear Professor Edward, I'm very happy to have you here. We know each other for probably 6, 7 years, and we collaborated for the past 7, 8 years. Can you tell us more about your academic background and how you ended up working at Jordanian sites? Because we know
Thank
that
you, Saib.
Australian teams are working in Jordan for the past 50 years, if not more.
Yeah, really more like 60. Um, Thank you, Saib, for inviting me on your podcast. Yeah, I was a student. I became interested in archaeology, changing from another career in my early 20s. I managed to enroll at the University of Sydney, and the leading staff there, Professor Basil Hennessy and Dr. Tony McNichol, had developed an excavation at Pella in Jordan, in northwest Jordan. And a large part of that was as a training dig for students coming through their studies. And I managed after the end of my third year to do well enough to be invited. And the first year I had excavated on the Umayyad period, at the top of Khurbat Fahel in Pella. We found amazing finds in an earthquake deposit. And then there was another amazing story about how we developed the prehistoric component of the dig in the next valley to the north, Wadi Hammeh.
How when did you start working on Natufian sites in Jordan?
Well, that was in late 1982, nearly 42 years ago. And that happened because the director, Tony McNichol, gave a seminar at Sydney University to the prehistoric archaeologist. And he said, how do you think we're going? And I said, good, but so Tony McNichol said, do you have anyone in mind? He came out and Tony wanted him to tell him where the tell at Khurbat Fahel began, where the natural layers gave rise to the cultural layers, where the division was at the base. And so on the first morning, he discovered that, and he still had a month to go. And he said, what will I do now? And Tony McNichol said, I don't know, maybe look around and see what you can find. So he went into the next valley to the north and found a 40 to 60 meter high sequence of late Pleistocene Paleolithic archaeology that no one had ever found before, capped by a great Natufian site. And then underneath it there were smaller epipaleolithic sites. And one day, the director and Phillip Macumber, we were standing on the side of the cliff looking at it. And then he turned to me and he said, I think you should work on this for your MA. So I said, yes, immediately. And that was the beginning of my career in Jordan. So that's how I came to be working there, because of the involvement of Phillip Macumber and what he discovered.
So, how many seasons did you work at the site of Natufian village in northwestern Jordan?
We worked for 10 years.
I'm talking about him 27.
Yeah, we worked from 1982 to 1990, about 10 seasons. And then we had a long break and wrote that up. And I went back there in 2014, and we've done 4 more seasons since that time, ending in 2022.
So you managed to come and work during the COVID hiatus or immediately after
Yeah,
the
we
peak of
just got
COVID.
funding. We just got funding before the COVID outbreak, and we're planning to come back in 2019, but or 2020, but we had to wait a couple of years. Yeah.
So how many structures did you find at the site? It's relatively big locality for prehistoric period.
Yeah, it's one of the biggest excavations laterally. It's around 310 square meters, which is quite big. And the structures are very big. So we have one major one, which is 14 meters across. It's an oval, but in the longest axis. And I think it's probably the largest, one of the largest late Pleistocene houses ever found. And the other is 11 by 6. There are a couple of others which are branching off them, and we can see others that have been cut by erosion. But in the more recent excavations, we were going downwards from, because the first series were concentrating on exposing the top layer of the village laterally to the floors. And now we're doing going under one of those houses. We did a small pit about 2.5 by 1.5 meters. And now we're making that a 10 by 5 and have gone down through all of the layers. It's very heavy finds. I excavated 500,000 stone tools in the first series, and we've excavated 500,000 stone tools in the new series, apart from all the other special finds.
Also, you discovered tombs at the site with human remains. How many human remains
Graves.
you and your team found?
Yeah, graves. At the base of the village, before the village was founded, around 12,500 BCE, they had founded a communal settlement, a communal burial field or cemetery. And so whenever you dig down below the houses, you usually find graves, and that's what we have dug into the rock sediments at the base.
I think you collaborated with the DOA from Irbit, if I'm not mistaken.
From Urbid, yeah, we're in the Urbid Governorate, and
Yeah.
so we're under the jurisdiction of the Urbid Department of Antiquities, which is based at Dar es Saraya. And because it's close, and we've had representatives also with Case occasionally.
What Jordanian DOA is planning to do with fines, because you were operating for a couple of decades, and you must have a big collection of artifacts and human
Yeah.
remains and shreds.
The natural repository is Dar es Saraya, the Urbid Department of Antiquities, and we have a lot of the minor finds, like the animal bones or flint tools, still at the Pella Dig House, and we have some key finds in the New Jordan Museum. The large in sized stelae or rock slabs, which are some of the world's first large scale sculpture. Quite a few things in Australia. In those days, in the University of Sydney dig, many finds were divided. And since 1990, I worked at my new job at Trobe University in Victoria. And so really between Australia, the Jordan Museum and Urbid and Pella Dig House are where the finds are. I'm actually trying to get one of those 3 slabs is in the National Gallery of Australia in a storeroom. And I want to get it back because it's a gap where it should be in the Jordan Museum. And one of them is in the Dar es Saraya in Urbid. And my aim is to get them all back together like the 3 amigos
Of course.
together where they should be, because they're one of the great, it's the entree to Jordanian heritage. And I consider the one in Australia like Jordan's Elgin marbles. And I'm not going to give up on my struggle to convince Australian authorities to give it back.
Usually, how many Australian students would come as part of your team? I managed to introduce one of your students, and we became very good friends, Adam Valka. He became doctor in the meantime.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
he's
we have
yeah, please.
We have quite a small team in Wadi Hammeh 27. At Pella, there's a lot of undergraduates, but I basically was taking honours students in our BA or masters or PhD students because it's a very small team and we don't dig quickly. So we've had quite a few honours students and PhD students. So apart from Adam Velker, Lauren Prosser has just finished her study of the micromorphology of the sediments, which has been very revealing. She did that PhD at the Australian National University. We had Rosie Robertson work on some of the art items for her honours project. And although she didn't dig at the site, Janine Major did a comprehensive study for her PhD on the art objects from all of the excavations we've done, and that was published in Ex Orienta from Germany. And yeah, we've got other students which are midway through.
Are you planning to come in 2025?
Well, at the moment, I'm applying for more funding because what we want to do is finish this great collective grave, which we've already discovered at the top 8 people in it. And it's a treasure trove of late Pleistocene jewelry and ornaments. We have shell ornaments, we have shell and bone ornaments strung together. We even have a necklace of bird bones, which we can still see some of the preserved cordage. So it's quite a unique and important find. But like everything, you need to apply for money,
Of course.
and yeah.
Regarding the tomb, were 8 bodies buried at the same time, or they were interned in a span of 20, 30 years?
Well, we haven't finished it. So our specialist, Dr. Fanny Bokentan from Paris, is not quite sure, but it looks like they were buried in a container, a
Yeah.
box, or a void, because none of the skeletons, although they're crammed together and the bones rearranged, none of them really disturb the earliest ones. So the most likely indication at this stage is that they're really a mass burial.
Yeah.
But it's hard to say over what period, whether it was days or whether it was in a container and bones were added to it in a void. That is to say, without what we think is that no earth or sediment has been pulled up to put more bones in. If they were added to, they were added to in a kind of a space or a coffin or a container.
What kind of objects you and your team found there, except bones and
Well,
did you
it's
find any
first
kind of goods buried with deceased member of that
yeah.
community?
We have the main one is the seashell, the tusk shell, which have been called dentalium, a scaphopod, and they make their little tubes, which they make. They're in a necklace, and we have little bracelets and anklets, and we have bone pendants, which are drilled to be worn. We have a collection of beautiful bone points put in the top of the grave, which might have been something that one of the people worked on in life. And as I said, we have these other rare bird bone um, uh, necklaces. And in one of the burials were 2 children, put one on top of the other in containers or shrouds, and both had a little stone pillow that their heads rested on.
Talking about HEMA 27, do we have sites in the same area built around the same time? Let's say 12 or 12,000 or 13,000 years
1000 BC, yeah.
BC.
Look,
Yeah.
there are quite a few Natufian sites in Jordan, but what is surprising is how rare sites like Wadi Hammeh 27 is. The first open air village outside a cave was Malaha, Ain Malaha,
Yeah.
in the northern Jawlan, in what's now Israel in Palestine. And there's really nothing like that until Wadi Hammeh 27 came up. This is for the early Natufian period. And in the Mediterranean zone in Western Jordan, there's really nothing like it still. The biggest find is Shubaika 1
Yeah.
in to the northeast of Jordan, which has beautiful houses. They're not quite together in a clump. They're probably spaced around the edge of an ancient lake, but that's the next most complex thing in Jordan. You have a late Natufian house and village at Ain Rahub near Irbid. And in the Wadi Rayyan, you have in a cave on a steep cliff, Araka Dub has a Natufian house underneath a pre-pottery Neolithic A house. So the big villages like Wadi Hammeh 27 are really not very common, and it's very surprising. We have another interesting twist on that story because when I was in Dar es Salaam a few years ago, walking upstairs, I found this beautiful basalt mortar, like almost up to your waist, with big, long basalt pestles. And I could almost sense that it was from Wadi Hammeh 27. This was an illegal find, which had been brought to Dar es Salaam from the court of the Northern Jordan Valley, confiscated by the police. So we've just done an article on that about where it might come from, which should be published in the Jordan Journal of History and Archaeology in the next issue. And it's either from Wadi Hammeh 27 or somewhere in Jordan is another big site, because only the big village sites have these big vessels and grinding equipment.
Can we reconstruct the occupation of the sites and how many people lived during that period at Hammeh 27?
Well, these village hunter-gatherer villages are, it's about half a hectare in area. It has in the centre probably 3 to 5 meters of superimposed houses. We have found 3 series of houses over the burials that last up to 500 years. And the new work by Lauren Prosser indicates she can't really find any breaks. We used to think, or I used to think, that they must vacate the site seasonally because, or over time, because being hunter-gatherers, they will run down the food resources of the area. But we really can't see any breaks. And indeed, there are parallels amongst, for example, North American tribes, the Arikara,
Mhm.
who would have a main base and they would leave, but they would keep a few people there to maintain it, like a few old people, people who are old or sick and couldn't really move around. So there are many different possibilities. But the other thing that Lauren has found is that a lot of the sediments are collapsed pisé or adobe, and it looks like the houses were much more solid than we've realised. So we know they have stone bases, and we thought that they were probably reeds and skins, but now it looks like they may have clay, which is added to them, like a kind of a sun-dried clay, or like what we call pisé or adobe.
How was your collaboration with the archaeological team from Australia that worked in Palace since 1981? You mentioned that it was part of the University of Sydney, and Stephen Burke was the head of the project. Have you been involved with the work at Pella, which is of course
Yeah, I started.
more
I
recent site
started
of
there.
Hemma? Pella is from Hellenistic period.
Yeah, I started there like Stephen, and Stephen and I were classmates. And Pamela Watson was a classmate in our first year through honours. And so in the first decade, I did that as a doctoral and postdoctoral student for the University of Sydney, so that the permits were held by the directors, Basil Hennessy and Tony McNichol. And really, when I came to La Trobe in 1990, I had finished my work at Wadi Hammeh 27, and I did a number of other archaeological sites in Jordan, and didn't go back to 2014. But yes, we cooperate well with the University of Sydney still.
What's the legacy of Basil Hennessy? He's a big name
Yeah, Basil
in
Hennessy
the
is
history of archaeology and the history of
yeah,
archaeology in this region.
yeah,
You had the opportunity to work with him.
yeah, he's a huge influence on Australian archaeology in Jordan. For example, Basil was a student of Kathleen Kenyon and
Exactly.
worked at Jericho. He became director after her of the Kenyon Institute, British Institute of Archaeology in Jerusalem, and he worked at places like the Damascus Gate and Samaria. But his main excavations in the 1960s and 70s were at Talal at Rasul, and then he, in 1978, originally with the Americans, he and Tony Nicol began to work at Pella. So he also worked a lot on Cyprus. So Basil Hennessy was really the beginning of the Australian involvement in Jordan in many ways, and he, being very generous mentor, he gave us all important sites and phases to work on, and really looked after us. So we owe him a lot. Same with Tony McNichol, who died unfortunately in his 40s.
What's the perspective of Australian research teams in this region? Unfortunately, we have a series of conflicts, and on the other hand, the region was never peaceful. So, despite all these obstacles, Australian, British, and American teams managed to work hand in hand with local scholars and local historians and archaeologists.
Well,
What that
as you
looks
know,
on in the perspective for you in 2000,
well,
almost
for me,
2025?
I've worked in Jordan, been in Jordan since for 44 years, since 1980.
Yeah.
And as far as I can see, the people's generosity's never changed throughout all of the conflicts. There, even though every country has its problems, we can safely say that Jordan is an oasis of stability amongst every country around it, which has massive problems. And to give you examples, we have dug through the first Intifada, the second Intifada. We've dug through the Lebanese War in the 1980s, and we were digging and surveying in the Jordan Valley earlier this year in March during the Gaza War, and it didn't really look much different to us, except that the department insisted that our representative come out every day when we were surveying the Jordan Valley. And for me, to try and explain it to people who've heard of the troubles in the Golan Heights and so on, it's hard to explain to them that you can go to Case, to Romero's restaurant in the middle of these wars, take a delightful lunch with a glass of wine in the afternoon, and look out over the Golan Heights, which are a couple of kilometers away. And you couldn't apparently be in a more peaceful part of the world. So I think that the security situation for Jordan is that things seem to be well under control.
I hope so.
Yeah.
If you want to add anything, you're more than welcome. Please.
Yeah, well, we've one of the questions you asked me about the most prominent Australians to work in Jordan,
Yeah.
I put it in three categories. So coming out of Pella, of course, there was Dr. Stephen Burke at the University of Sydney, who worked at Pella and Talal at Rasul. He did more excavations. Alan Walmsley, who was at Pella as a field director, he pioneered the Umayyad and Abbasid archaeology there. Also worked in Gharandal in South Jordan, and the Islamic period, the Umayyad period in Jerash. Jamie Fraser
Of
is
course.
now the director of the Albright Institute in Jerusalem, is working on Khurbat Gozlan, which is an early Bronze Age olive processing station south of Pella in the Jordan Valley. There was Jamie Lovell, who was also the director of the Kenyon Institute, who worked on Wadi Rayyan and cave exploration in northern Jordan. Pamela Watson worked in the Byzantine period. Kate DaCosta did a survey of Roman pottery in northwest Jordan, and Pamela Watson did the Pella Hinterland survey. Ina Kerberg worked for 19 years with Tony Ostraz in the Hippodrome at Jerash, with Tony Ostraz and excavated that. My own students, Alexandra Ariotti did her PhD on Roman to Umayyad hamlets at Ghor al-Hadith near the Dead Sea, and has recently excavated Tawabin, a large fort probably from Hellenistic through Nabatean and Roman times. And going way back, as I saw an article recently in the Jordan Times, William Jobling, Bill Jobling,
Yeah,
did
Jordan.
long-term surveys of basically Semitic language rock cut inscriptions like Aramaic and Safavidic in Wadi Rum. And so we see quite a few Australians have held important administrative positions. So Basil Hennessy, Jamie Fraser, and Jamie Lovell have all been directors of British and American institutes. Pamela Watson was an assistant director at CBRL, British Institute.
Yeah, at the
So
CBRL, you guys have a big impact, and there's always overlapping between Australian and British academia, and people come and go from one place to another. And this is the way how things should be operated, because in the end of the day, the expertise is the most important thing.
Yeah.
We're going
Naturally, people tended to. Australia was a colony of Britain, and until the early 1970s,
of course,
when you wanted to do a PhD, you just went to Britain. You went to Oxford. It was only with Tony for the Middle Eastern archaeology. Actually, it was Basil Hennessy and Tony McNichol who began taking on PhD students in Australia, in Sydney, around 1980, about the time I started. So that was a strong development as Australia became more kind of academically and culturally independent.
I hope you're going to raise funds, and we'll meet in person, because I haven't seen you for a while. I think the last time we've met was before COVID.
Yeah, probably.
We've met in 2019.
Yeah.
We're going to coordinate, and I'm looking forward to hearing more from you and your team members regarding your research. So I'll be very happy to feature these results and discoveries in the paper as well.
Well, we hope we got some more things coming up early next year.
Thank you so much. All the best.
Thank you. So, take care.
Bye bye.